You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth! You can't handle the truth! There's the television. All right there. All right there. Look, listen, Neil, Fred. This is politics at its finest. This is where the rubber meets the road.
Why, oh why didn't I take the blue pill?
Hello and welcome again to Deconstructing Truths. Well, we're on number 4 now, and as I promised, and this is the last one that I had planned, we're going to discuss the origin of life. How did life get here from non-life? There are some theories and there are some ideas, and we're just going to discuss because, and here's kind of the thing, we get told, here's the answer. Kids, you're going to be tested on this, you have to learn this, this is the origin of life. And people believe it. Well, should it be a fact? And if it's not a fact, why are people required to learn it? And if you're required to learn a non-fact, why aren't you required to learn all of the different ideas of how life could have got here that are non-facts? Why only one? And not only that, at the end of this, I want you to see why I think all this is important. I want you to see why I think what I think. And hey, give me what you think. Do you think I'm right in what I see? Remember, I'm not claiming to have an answer. I'm just saying, hey, I see this great big problem. I don't know exactly what it is. I know it's lies, I know it's deceptions, I know it's a form of mind control. But I don't know the reasons behind it, but we'll get to all that. Right now, let's go see what are the facts that we actually know about the origin of life. Okay, let's start with, well, the origin of life. How did we go from a state of non-life to a state of life? Is that even possible? Well, some of the theories of how it came here to Earth was we were seeded. That means either aliens came and purposely dropped off life-making materials, or a comet hit and it had little microbials on it, and from there they evolved into what we see today. That's, I think it's called panspermia. That doesn't solve the problem. That just moves it from our planet to out there somewhere. How did life arise? You had non-life and then you had life. Is that possible? How did they get here then? We don't know. No one's ever observed that happening. They've been trying to do experiments to prove how it could happen for years now. They may do it someday. I don't know. As I said, just because you can prove how something could happen does not mean you proved how it did happen. So even if they've figured out how to do it, I don't care. That's great. But they haven't done it yet. We're talking about facts. It hasn't happened yet. Is it possible? I don't know. In order to make the claim that something's impossible means you have to know everything about it. Well, I obviously don't know everything about it. So is it possible? I guess it's possible, but what we can say is we've never observed it. Well, if we've never observed it, then you have to believe it can happen. You have to have faith that it can happen. These people have faith that it could happen. It should be okay. It should. But a lot of people get mad when you say that. Alright. Our next possibility is, did something else outside of our universe create life after it created the universe? I don't know. Certainly can't prove that. I believe it. I have faith in it. Much like the other people have faith that life can come from non-life. I don't see the problem. Neither has the answer, both have faith. Okay. That's my take on that. That's really all we could say about the origin of life. But now I'd like to talk a little bit about something that goes hand in hand with that, and that is evolution, creation, the whole debate there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start by explaining to you, as I understand it from information that I've read, the two different stories. Most people, and I'm not saying everybody, most people choose one side or the other, right? So we'll just take one and then we'll talk about the other. If you take the evolutionary side, you're probably only reading information from evolutionists. So your idea of what the creationists believe is probably completely wrong. Okay, and same with the other side. If you're a creationist, you probably only read creationist material, so your view of what the evolutionists believe is probably wrong. Or some people, like I try to read both and get a fairer understanding, because both sides misrepresent the other oftentimes. And they create these straw men, which is where you create a argument. You'll take an argument that they have, you'll change it a little bit to make it so it's a very easy argument to knock down, but it misrepresents what the other person is actually arguing. That happens all the time in this. And this is where we have the problem, because you have the popular view and you have the unpopular view. One of the reasons I'm doing this series is because part of what I see is when you have two opposing views, you have checks and balances. They keep an eye on each other and they both point out problems with the other's theory. This way, what you end up with, hopefully, is something pretty close to the truth in the middle. What I see happening is one side's more popular than the other, so they don't answer all the questions that they should be, and they just kind of dismiss the other side. This gets rid of the fact checking. This gets rid of the error checking. This leads to a form of mind control. You're not left to make up your own mind. You're only given one position. And that's where I see a huge problem. The questions that each bring up are valid. They should be looked at seriously and they should be answered honestly. But that's not what we're getting. We're the ones suffering and losing out, because we're fed one side of the argument, and rather than stopping to answer these questions, the story moves on. And that becomes a problem, because the longer and farther it moves on, you have an idea based on an idea, based on an idea, based on an idea, and then you've got nothing close to the truth. And hopefully this is what we're going to see. So let me give you the two stories, and then we'll talk about those. All right, let's talk about the evolutionary story. Okay, and I'm not going to get in great detail on either one of these stories, just kind of an overview so we can discuss the overviews and how much sense they make and how much fact we have. And like I said, I want you to make up your own mind. I'm not trying to push either story. The evolutionary view basically is, the earth was a hot molten mass, and all this, but then life arose. There's debate on where, because like I said, they're still looking into how life can come from non-life, and they think it's an environmental issue, that you need the proper environmental conditions for this to happen. So there's kind of a debate where it occurred at, but it's generally believed that life arose from somewhere, and it started off like on the microbial level, and then from there they kind of bred and dispersed, and as they went into different areas, they evolved and adapted to those areas, and they split off into different species, and over a long period of time, and then eventually they became something split off from some primate mammal, and here we are, the crowning jewel of evolution at present time, us. So that's kind of the evolutionary story in a nutshell, just really quick. Okay, the difference that I see is in the creationist story, God made man in the garden perfect along with the animals. When he kicked man out and man began dying and had to disperse, when they adapted to their environments, rather than gaining information in their adaptation, they lost information because they came from a perfect state and kind of devolved rather than evolved into those areas. So when you gained the ability for, when you adapted to your environment, let's say, and it was cold, so you kept long hair, eventually you would breed out the ability to grow short hair. So it was more of based on loss rather than gain in their adaptation to their environments. That's the way I understand it. Okay, so what do we observe? What do we observe with these two basic stories in mind? What do we observe around us? Now, when you break it down and you start looking at the genetic level, you get into a little bit different area. And I'm not trying to criticize one side or the other, but what we actually observe is a decline in the DNA. We observe a decline in the information in the DNA. There's been geneticists who have written books there's one called Why Aren't We Dead Yet? Because if the human race has been here as long as we claim, with the amount of accumulation of mistakes per generation that they observe, we should have been dead a long time ago. That's what this geneticist has come up with. Maybe the rate changed. There's a lot of possibilities that could answer that, but regardless, what we observe is a decline. So in the genetic sense, what makes more sense is the creation story. But, who knows? Who knows? But it's not irrefutable evidence either, but it's a reason that belief would be reasonable. Another thing is, if we started observing that, if two microbes did happen to get together and did happen to have, a baby or split off, two of the smallest animals you can think of that we would have first had copulation that first got together, we don't observe an increase in information on the genetic level. Therefore, if you're going to believe that they survived a long time, much less evolved in an upward range where you're increasing the information, that would be a faith-based position. It would. We don't observe that. And I'm not picking on that belief. I'm simply trying to prove, look, you have faith regardless of which side you believe. You have faith. The problem isn't the faith. The problem that I see, as I explained in other areas, is why is that not okay? Why? That's the question that needs to be answered. Why is it not okay to admit that either side is belief-based? They're both faith positions. There's a lot of other arguments out there. There's a lot of other things to discuss about the origin of life or the evolution of any species. But I think what we're discussing, you don't have to get into all that other stuff because these are the base things. If you can't prove the base things, you have to make an assumption. So everything else is built on assuming one of these sides. So if the assumption right off the bat is wrong, you're interpreting it wrong. See, that's the part that I'm kind of trying to get in. I don't need to get into all the technical stuff. If you can't prove life coming from non-life, then everything built on that is an assumption. It's an interpretation. And the same with if you believe God made it, everything you build on that is an assumption. It's an interpretation. Both sides have the same facts. Both sides are interpreting it within their worldview. Well, if on the base level you understand that I have this belief, this entire story is built on this base belief. I think that's important, because if you have that understanding, then you should be okay with the other guy who also has a base belief, but it's a different one. And they have an entire story and history built on that. Only in the end, only one is going to be right. But we all need to understand that we're holding on to a faith. We're holding on to a hope. We're holding on to whatever you want to name it other than a fact. Okay, I want to give you something to think about. This is an example of what I think is happening. I want you to keep this in mind as we discuss the rest of these issues. What if you were at home with, friend, relative, it doesn't matter who, but you're at home with someone and some kind of an accident occurs, and the person you're with gets hurt to the point of death. You call 911, the police and the ambulance arrive, and the police immediately start looking for evidence to prove that you killed this person. Would you call that an investigation, or would you call that something else? Just a question, just a thought. Now keep this in mind as we discuss the rest of this. All right, so if we have two stories, right? I want you to think about this in light of the example I just gave, and let's look at just one part of this story. Let's just look at primitive man, right? The common popular story is, he grunted, lived in cave, painted these corny pictures, drug women around by the hair. We portray him as being stupid. And yet, the evidence suggests, DNA-wise, we're declining. We're not getting better, we're declining. And if we look through the artifacts and things that we find, sometimes we find some pretty amazing things, like the battery in Egypt. There was a hammer found that was made from a smelting of a few different types of metals that we didn't believe was possible at that time, that we didn't believe, not that it wasn't possible, but that man hadn't been doing that yet. But there's a lot of things that have been found that weren't explainable, and some of this stuff isn't released on a very public level where a lot of people don't hear about these things unless they're looking for them. But there's been a lot of stuff found. Maybe, and I'm just going to put this forward, it's been discussed, and I've read about it, I've heard about it, and maybe man wasn't stupid. Maybe the reason that we're so technologically advanced now as compared to back then was because we've developed these lines of communication. I mean, think about it. Back then, if you lived on a farm and your only real contact was the neighbors, because travel wasn't big back then. It was horse and buggy, or just horse, or walk. So your world, in essence, for you was very small. It was only within travel distance, which we had very few ways to travel. Couldn't pick up the phone, couldn't get online. So if you wanted to, let's say, figure out how to get, maybe you got a pond, you need to water your crops, and you're trying to figure out how to do this any way other than carrying a whole bunch of buckets of water. So you would have to sit there and think of a way to viably irrigate your land. Well, as communication would get better, and books are starting to be written, and phones are starting to be invented, and the internet, as we progress through this, and it becomes easier and easier to get a hold of information, now you're no longer thinking of, well, how am I going to do this? Now you go find a way to go get a book and read about how someone else did it. Or, get online and look at how someone else did it. But see, now you don't have to come up with a base idea. Now you take someone else's idea and you build on it. And in this way, knowledge as a whole grows. And from there, we started gaining more technology. So maybe man didn't start out stupid. Maybe genetically he had better memory than we do. Maybe he learned a lot easier. Maybe he was much healthier. Maybe he was, genetically just much more fit. But there wasn't schools. There wasn't these communication things that we have now. Maybe the story is not really the one we've been fed. Maybe this is part of this matrix that we live in that I keep mentioning. Now, I'm not saying that, well, see, that's how it happened. What I'm saying is, one story seems to be trying to prove something rather than investigating, well, what did happen. And this is why I said these two investigative sciences, I guess you could say, they keep each other in check. Kind of like, think about how the government here in America is supposed to work. You have the judicial, legislative, and executive branches, and they're supposed to keep each other honest. They're supposed to keep anything bad from creeping in. The theory is if one side starts to get overpowerful or overbearing or start pushing illegal stuff, the other two will rein them in. If you only have a dictator, then everything is subject to that dictator, and it doesn't matter if they're right or wrong. It's going to be their way. It's the same here. If you only have one worldview, one idea dominating everything, well, it's going to be that way. And it's not going to matter if it's right or wrong. You're not allowed to question it. If you have two, they question each other. And then if they're equal, they can force each other to answer those questions. And if the answer is not adequate, then it gets dealt with. It's not allowed to be promoted as fact if both are equal. See, this is the problem I see happening. This is the part that upsets me, because the areas that are wrong and are being questioned are being ignored. They're being shoved to the side, and the popular worldview is being forced. And they're not answering a lot of the questions. And I encourage anybody, just go read both sides and ask yourself, spot the interpretations, spot the presuppositions, and ask yourself, have they adequately answered these things? What are they presupposing? Hey, if they're presupposing life can come from non-life, then anything they build on that has to be questioned. It cannot be promoted as a fact. And it's the same with, did God just put it here? You cannot prove that. And I think we should be investigating these things, but I think where the shortcomings are, we need to be honest about them. We need to not be afraid to ask the questions. We need to not let them shut us up when we try to ask the questions. And by that I mean, if you wonder about that, just go watch Expelled. Just go watch it, and regardless of what you want to believe, put your bias aside. And they were just asking questions, and they were fired just for asking questions. I mean, I've read about that for years now, that's what happens. If you get into any kind of a position in teaching or some of these companies, and you simply question some of these evolution things, you are chucked. You don't even have a job anymore. And it's not fair. That's not seeking truth. That's promoting worldview. We like to pretend in our political correctness that we're against discrimination. Well, then you need to be against something like that, because that's a form of discrimination. It's discriminating against a person for their belief. That's wrong. Either discrimination's okay or it's not. You can't have it, well, it's okay here because I want it and like it here. No, it's either okay to be that way or it's not. You know, I think it's not. You don't discriminate for any reason. Any. At least that's how I feel. And that's why I tell people, make up your own mind, but do it based on the truth, the facts. If the answer is we don't know, we need to admit that to ourselves. All right, in conclusion, to kind of sum everything up, I just want to say, we don't know how life got started. We kind of, sort of have ideas of how it progressed, but we really can't prove them. I think it kind of might have came off like I was attacking evolution, but I really wasn't. I'm simply pointing out the problems, and that's the popular theory right now. I mean, for all we know, there could be other ideas out there, but because we're so caught up in these two and fighting each other, maybe we don't see them. Maybe we're not seeing what's going on because of that. So maybe, just maybe, if we would stop being dogmatic about these beliefs, start really looking around, and when we come across something that the answer is we don't know, maybe we should just say, hey, you know what? We don't know. This warrants further investigation. And just investigate rather than trying to prove an idea we already have. Just my thoughts. Tell me what you think. Go ahead and leave a comment. Subscribe to my channel. I'm actually having a lot of fun with this, and can't wait to see you next week. I'll come up with something. Hopefully somebody will leave me some ideas, maybe some comments, things we can look into and just discuss. Thanks a lot. See you later. Hey everybody, Steve here. I wanted to add this at the end because, you know, I made this video yesterday morning and with the intention of posting it today. Well, last night when I got home and checked my email, it was flooded. It was flooded with a bunch of bullies. If you read these comments, I mean, talk about timely. You'll see that the video I made yesterday is exactly what they're demonstrating. They're showing exactly what I'm talking about. Their whole attitude. You could see it. You can see as you read the comments, you see how they cling to the presuppositions. You see how they take those interpretations and they merge them with the facts. They either are unable to separate the two, or they're being deceptive. That's my opinion. The other thing is, number one, look, if you're going to talk to me like that, I'm just going to block you. You know, I'm sure they'll come back if they're trolls under different names, whatever. I'll just block them. I don't care. But what I am going to do is I'm going to go back and I'm going to go through all the points I made, and I'm going to pull up the articles and I'm going to discuss the article. I'm not going to read the article. I'll just discuss the pertinent points. I'll leave the links in the description so you can go check it yourself and read the whole thing. And I'll tell you, and I'll explain how I got my idea from this. Now remember, my idea isn't to change things. I was simply questioning them and saying, it seems to me that we can't know for certain. That was the only point I was making in these certain areas. Apparently they think that I'm anti-science, so it might be kind of surprising when I pull up these articles, you know, from scientists who are saying they found these things, like, you know, the speed of light, how they slowed it down using cold and vacuum at Harvard. But, you know, apparently the Harvard scientists aren't good enough, and maybe, I don't know what they're... But if you slow it down with cold and vacuum and you look out in space and it's cold and vacuum, I don't think it's unreasonable to say, well, hey, maybe your numbers are a little off. This means the speed of light's not a constant. It could be being affected out there. That was the only point I made. Your numbers might be off. And if your dependency is on the speed of light, the light itself, I'm not talking about the number, I'm talking about on the light itself. If you're measuring something using light to bounce it and come back and timing it, and it's out in deep space, it could throw your stuff off, because that's cold and vacuum, and we've seen that can affect its speed. Because of a scientific discovery, and I say, well, I think this deserves more questioning, that makes me unscientific? Do you see the attitude? Do you see the religious fervor that they defend these ideas with? How just questioning it, the free thought Gestapo comes out. The guy does a rally cry. It's hilarious. I was laughing. Oh man, I was laughing. But I just hope you can see the reaction that people give just for questioning. What does that say about our society? Really, what does that say? That makes a statement about us as a society. To me, it's sad in a way. Funny, but sad. Well, anyways, enjoy this. From now on, when I make videos and I'm referencing something like scientific or whatever, I'll leave the article in the comments. I'll start referencing it all. That way you can see I'm not just making stuff up. I might be wrong in how I'm interpreting it, because everything's interpreted. You have to interpret everything. But I'm getting it from somewhere. I'm not just making it up. And if you don't like the article I'm referencing, then call the guy who wrote it. I'm not writing these articles. So, anyway, I'll see you next week.
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth! You can't handle the truth! There's the television. All right there. All right there. Look, listen, Neil, Fred.
This is politics at its finest. This is where the rubber meets the road.
Why, oh why didn't I take the blue pill?